Hi, welcome to Healing Humanity. I want to read a couple verses to you today that have found me. I'm just going to read them off my notes here. Ecclesiastes 10, verse 4. If a ruler's anger rises against you, do not leave your post. Calmness can lay great errors to rest. And then Ecclesiastes 12:14. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. Now, why do those matter? These things remind me of the path that I've gone on and why I think that I've been chosen um, to walk this path the way that I have. Um, because healing humanity happens from person to person. It happens from conversation to conversation. It happens by one habit to another habit, by sharing those habits with others. And it happens over time. It doesn't, our healing didn't, the way that humanity is right now didn't just happen overnight. It happened over, a millennia. It happened over so much time. And we're the kind of people that we're sort of tribal in nature. We go with the group. We follow the leader. We're habit driven, right? At least most of us. And I think that the reason that I've been chosen to walk this path is because a lot like Jesus, I I can stand when others are pushing, when they're rising against you or me, which they did. And I think about the times where people I looked up to, doctors, priests, pastors, um, a couple bosses, when they're all part of some sort of group, and it didn't seem to matter what state I was in. I just was like bombarded with all this craziness, no matter what state I went into. And I've talked about that before, but I really believe that God put me in this position and trained me nearly my whole life to withstand this kind of pressure because he needed somebody to stand against the rulers. He needed somebody to not cower to those particular powers. Because if I had cowered and if I had walked away or if I had um, absorbed the judgment and the shame that might have come with that judgment, and it would have stopped me. It would have tripped me up. It would have stopped me. It would have, I mean, it saddened me. Don't get me wrong. This has been a tough walk. But I also know that, from the jobs that I've had and from the people that had in my life, um, both personally and professionally, I know how to stand. I know how to hold my power when others are trying to push me. I had to do that for 30 years of my life, running board meetings. So I really believe that God trained me to have the kind of personality of someone that can just stand. And I think that over time, not initially, by far, um, the judgment was tremendous, you know. But because I was able to stand, because I was able to silently stand, because it's not the same for a woman as it is for a man. And you know, we all walk a different path. So if you find something different, that's great for you. But for me, I have found that it is not the same as a path for a man. And that if a man stands, he can stand and fight back. But a woman does not always have that privilege. Not always. She would be judged harsher. She would be called names. She would be diminished completely because she's too hard to handle. And I've seen it over and over and over again. So sometimes you have to stand, even though you know that what's being shared with people is false. There's falsities. There's evilness behind it, selfishness behind it. You have to stand and be calm within that stance. You can't cause a big fuss. You have to stand against it. You do not leave your post. Continue on. When I first arrived where I am now, I was very well aware that there were some negative judgments against me, and before anybody ever spoke to me, which I thought was ridiculous, but that's how the world is, unfortunately. So what did I do? I couldn't fight back. I couldn't abandon my post because I was sent here specifically. And I had to actually figure out a way to get people's attention by being, just being in front of them every single day, pushing myself to, attend things that were meaningful, so they could see who I truly was, even if they had no interest in knowing. And, it didn't happen just here, but it happened in other places too. Because I know, because of what I've learned and what God has shown me, I know that it's not me to judge, right? As much as I would have judged in the past, I absolutely would have judged. I would have probably fought back a little bit. I would have defended myself. I would have, just made a verbal mess of things, probably. But by what God has shown me, that in His scriptures, He tells us that judgment is for Him to make, not for us. And so I had to continually keep that within my mind, and know that God was ultimately going to judge. Either they were going to change, they being anyone I may have met that rose up in anger against me, or you know was in some sort of harsh judgment, or had an evil intent towards me, my life, or my family. um, I had to know that God was going to be the ultimate judge, that I was not going to be able to control the situation. It was too massive, honestly. But and I, and that's what drives me to want to heal humanity as a whole. You know, we are all we're all broken, in some form or another. We all make mistakes. If we learn to hold our post with people that are being disrespectful rather than fighting, I think we could all make a bigger change, because from that, it sort of sets the stage for others, right? Because we mock other people's, not mock, we mimic other people's behaviors. And so when people see me holding my own power, not giving my power away, not allowing people to bully me into some form of submission to their will, but me holding my power, and getting people to see there's something bigger than what they're seeing. um, by my behavior, I think it helps others to see that they can do that too, that they can attain um, that sense of power as well in their life. Because like I said, we're all are tribal, and we watch each other. So change happens from person to person. It happens from conversation to conversation, and from habit to habit. Like I said in the beginning, we all need we all need some form of healing. All of us. This world is out of it's just out of this world. It's so many things have been shared with us over the last 10 years. So many judgments that we've needed to make that many have failed to make. Many have been sitting on the fence about a lot of things, and we, like I said before, the fence is gone. We have to be able to make choices, ethical choices for the rest of our lives. How are we going to lead our life going forward? How, as humanity, do we want to live? And that's what's been happening for the last 10 years. We're at that stage right now where a lot of things, a lot of evil is being brought out, and a lot of things are being being addressed, and behaviors are going to be changing, or have been changing. And I'm not so naive that I think that all of humanity is going to get healed and we're all going to be well overnight. I get that. I know that that's not going to happen. But I do think that it just starts with one of us, right? One person, one conversation, one habit. Um, one, like I said, one person. That if you can affect one person by your own habits, by your own behavior, by your own conversations, then perhaps that will continue on with from that person to another. Um, you know, we will make incremental progress over time through empathy, education, um, modeling others' behaviors, mimicking other people's behaviors, and I think also through had to turn my video off, still battling this cold, but I think also through a system of rewards for kindness over cruelty. This world has been we've been battling rulers and um, powers that have been self-serving. They have been uh, not not using their power in a positive way, not to help other people. It's been a complete misuse of power. I mean, even down to some, local churches, which is sad. Even doctors, which I found, I think, out of everything, honestly, that one bothered me the most, because we go to the doctors in such a state of helplessness, and sometimes fear, sometimes just a curiosity. Most of the us don't go from a sense of knowing, like you don't know what's wrong with you, so you look to the doctors to help fix your problems. And a lot of people I've heard, and I even experienced it myself, a lot of these doctors, from the people that I've heard from, their doctors were not using their power correctly. They were not using their knowledge to assist others. It was completely that whole frame of mind was completely abandoned. And I encountered that myself. And I went to I don't know what it was called, but I was having trouble with my throat, which I've had occasionally. And I found it strange that he was going to do the scope down my throat, and he was able to get it down one side, and he pulled out, and he didn't even try the other side. And when I asked him about it, he said, "Oh, that side's bent. We're not going to be able to scope that side." Not knowing enough and not wanting to confront a doctor, I really didn't know what to say at that point. Not that I haven't confronted doctors in the past, but at that point I was nervous, and I didn't know what to say, and I knew that whatever was bothering me was sort of on that side of my throat. And I was frustrated, I was angry. But as I sat there waiting for him to return because he left the room, and I was waiting for him to return to the room, I remembered back that years before, when I had quit smoking cigarettes, I realized that I had had the scope done on both sides. It was not troublesome on either side. Um, so I knew he knew something that I didn't know, and he was not sharing it. And that was a complete misuse of his power. That was a complete self serving act on his part. And I think out of, well, that and the pastor that showed up at my house, but um, that was one of the ones that really bothered me the most. That he had no intent in his heart to help me, not at all. And that I feel for people that go through that, because that was that was probably one of the most frustrating things I had been through, because he had an opportunity to help. He had an opportunity to speak truth. He had an opportunity to do anything different than what he did, and he didn't. And that's what a lot of people are facing right now. This complete abandoned nature of helping one another rather than just serving self. You know, um, so I think that we need a system that that sort of rewards or glorifies the kindness in people rather than the cruelty. Especially like around along my path, people have judged me for being too quiet, too kind, too loving, too nice. I was told I was too nice to make money. You kidding me? Um, so I look at that and I think to myself, I have to have a fierce compassion for myself in those moments, because those moments can get to you. These people that are the rulers, the people in power, the people that are that have that have the power to help you, have the power to change your life, instead reframe the situation and don't bring kindness to you. They bring you down, um, judge you, or cause trouble for you. I would just say that those kinds of people, God looks at those people and he will judge them not based on their actions, but based on their heart, right? If they say that they're helping, but they're not really helping, or they say that they care, but they really don't, and you can see that in their behavior, just know that God is the ultimate judge, and he's not judging by action. He's not judging by what you say. He's judging you by your heart, all people. And so I don't think that there's any, I think that we need to glorify the kindness rather than the cruelty. If I had come on and I had been the kind of person maybe that I used to be, and I, lashed back and that kind of thing, like I said, that would not have gone well for me. Not in the physical. Online maybe. People would have been, oh yeah, hey, you know, take them down, whatever. But in the physical, in the real world, outside of social media, that would not have gone well. You just have to have a compassion for yourself. You have to have a kindness for yourself. You have to reframe the self-talk, and I struggle with it sometimes. I'm human. I'm definitely not perfect. I have my moments, and I have to reframe my thoughts. I have to reframe my life to get back to the self-talk that's not filled with shame or burnout or leading me to burnout. I just think that we need to have more kindness for ourselves. I heard somebody say one time along this path is, you know, what would life be like if you treated yourself like you loved yourself? And that was pretty powerful. Um, and so I think it's important for us to all think that, when we're going through a hard time, when we're facing disrespect, or we are facing harsh judgments or um, cruelty, I would just say, um, just remember your behavior is just as contagious as theirs. So if you can stand, if you can be respectful, if you can be an active listening, not listening to respond to somebody, but listening to actually hear what they're saying and then choose an appropriate response rather than an emotional response, that makes all the difference in the world. I think that's helped me a lot. I've had some people just yelling and screaming in my face a couple times, and you know, both those times I was present. I listened to what they were saying, but I knew that you know I couldn't get emotional like they were emotional. I used to. I would have. I would have lashed back right at them, but not so much anymore. Do I have that in me? Probably. Doesn't just disappear, but it's controlled. It's part of that active listening. I realize that under that action gives me more power because I'm not emotional, I'm not reactive. And I think that's part of the kindness that people think. That's I think that's what people think is weak, is that active listening and contemplating like how you're going to respond, giving it a moment, and then responding, as opposed to just emotionally lashing out or throwing back some other cruelties or names or whatever. We have to be the example that we want to see in the world. And I think if we get back to that, we can heal humanity. We can make a big difference. Some of the root drivers for all of this are judgment, arrogance, inequality, poverty, scarcity, and a strong lack of God's guidance. There are not enough strong churches right now. There's people out there talking about God's grace and all of this, but where is God's grace? Is it there for anyone to actually attain? Or is it just continued judgment? I mean, we have to ask ourselves some really hard questions. And I don't think that being kind should be judged as a weakness when you don't fully understand where that kindness comes from. That kindness comes from control. That nicety comes from active listening and understanding. Not only, active listening, but an understanding of what's being said to you or around you. So the sooner we get back to that, I think the healthier we'll all be, and the faster we can heal humanity. So until next time, just keep strong and keep nurturing yourself.